The next crime that we will consider is rape. There have been lots of changes in the definition of rape over the last few decades. The Model Penal Code, because it was written in the 1950s, reflects the old notions about rape, and we're going to see that they're really outdated. They are very protective of the men who are accused of rape and not protective of the victims, whether they are female or male. And so let's examine the Model Penal Code's definition of rape. Under the Model Penal Code, rape is defined as a male who has sexual intercourse with a female, not his wife, if he does one of several other things. And so we'll take a look at those other things in a minute, but let's concentrate on that first sentence. Under the Model Penal Code, the only person who can be guilty of rape is a man. And the only victims, the only group of victims are females, and especially females who aren't the man's wife. So it is legally impossible under the Model Penal Code for a man to rape his wife. It is legally impossible under the Model Penal Code for a man to rape another man. It is legally impossible under the Model Penal Code for a female to rape a man. It is legally impossible under the Model Penal Code for a female to rape another female. So we have a very narrow definition of rape under the Model Penal Code. This is going to be the main part that changes, as we'll see. We'll take a look at Pennsylvania's statute in just a second, and we're going to see that it's much more progressive and expansive. But rape was traditionally defined in this way. Now, feminist legal theorists will argue that that was mainly because rape was not so much a crime focusing on the victim, but focusing on the man's interest in the victim. So maybe it's a father, maybe it's a husband. We're really more concerned about their rights, so to speak, as obnoxious as that may sound today, their rights to that woman, their daughter, their wife. And so a husband was essentially had free reign over his wife. When she said yes to marrying him, she said yes to sex throughout the marriage. Therefore, he could not be guilty of rape against his wife. She could not refuse. We can see then also that same-sex rapes were not even considered, and a female raping a man was not even considered. So as we take a look at the Model Penal Code, this is a very important distinction to make. That under traditional statutes, and virtually every state once had a rape statute exactly like this, or very similar, only men who had sexual intercourse with females, not their wives, could be potentially guilty of rape. There were additional conditions that we still see today. These next parts are not uncommon, parts A, B, C, and D. So it is rape, which is the most serious sexual offense, if that intercourse is brought about through compulsion. So if we see if we take a look at part A, a male who has sexual intercourse with a female, not his wife, is guilty of rape if A, he compels her to submit by force or by threat of imminent death, serious bodily injury, extreme pain, or kidnapping to be inflicted on anyone. So it's either he actually forces her through serious bodily injury, so he actually causes her serious bodily injury, extreme pain, or he kidnaps her, or he threatens that against her, or he threatens or does any of those things to someone else, perhaps her child, perhaps her friend, whoever. But he tells her, if you do not let me have intercourse with you, I am going to kill your child. I'm going to kidnap your child, or any of these kinds of things. That would be rape. So rape is not just lack of consent. There are other sexual offenses that deal with sexual intercourse without consent but no force. But typically, rape requires that there is some threat or element of force. But another way that you can be guilty of rape without forcing or threatening force is shown in Part B, which says that if you have substantially impaired the power of the victim to appraise or control her conduct by administering a drug, intoxicant, etc., 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 to prevent resistance, you're guilty of rape. So if you slip someone the date rape drug and you have sex with them, even though you didn't use force, that would be rape. Another way that you can be guilty of rape is in Part C, is if the person is unconscious. So if, and again, under the Model Penal Code, only women can be victims. If the woman is passed out at a party and you have sex with her, you are guilty of rape. Assuming it's not your wife under the Model Penal Code, but you are guilty of rape. And then finally, if the female is less than 10 years old, it doesn't matter if she consented, it doesn't matter if you didn't use force. In fact, it doesn't require any force, it just requires that the female is less than 10 years old. This is usually what we call statutory rape. So any of these four ways are means by which you can be guilty of rape. If you have sexual intercourse through any of these means, you're guilty of rape. So again, it's not just simply lack of consent. In most instances, there are some special circumstances, like the victim is substantially impaired, the victim is unconscious, the victim is less than 10 years old, or you use force or threat of force. So lack of consent isn't the sole means by which a person is found guilty of rape, or it is not the reason a person is found guilty of rape. Lack of consent would be another lesser but still serious sexual assault crime. We're not going to study it, but there are, in Pennsylvania and other states, if you have sex without consent, but you didn't use force and none of those other impairment, unconsciousness, or age requirements apply, then you can be guilty of this lesser offense, but not rape. Pennsylvania in the 1990s really updated its rape statute. It actually had started it even earlier by getting rid of the spousal exception. So in Pennsylvania, we made in the 1980s, we made it a separate crime, spousal sexual assault. If you had done what would otherwise have been rape, but it was against your wife. So Pennsylvania had created a new law. They didn't call it rape, but they called it spousal sexual assault. And you could be guilty of a crime if you used force to get intercourse with your spouse, and particularly your wife. So we didn't recognize a wife who raped her husband, or obviously there weren't, back in the 1980s and early 90s, there weren't any same-sex marriages legally allowed, so we didn't have same-sex rape, but at least there was a crime prohibiting forceful, violent rape against, or sexual intercourse against a person's wife. In the mid-1990s, because of some cases that were made headlines in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania legislators went back and rewrote the rape laws in Pennsylvania and really made them very progressive, so that Pennsylvania reflects the most progressive rape statutes. So in Pennsylvania, if you look at that first sentence in Part A, you can see that it's very different than the Model Penal Code. In Pennsylvania, we say that a person, not a man, but a person, so either male or female, commits a felony of the first degree when the person engages in sexual intercourse with a complainant. So we can see that we're talking about persons here, we're talking about complainants. We don't say with a woman, not his wife. Those provisions are gone. So in Pennsylvania, it is possible for a man to rape a woman, as it is in the Model Penal Code, but that woman can also be his wife. So it is possible for a husband to rape a wife. It's possible for a woman to rape a man. It is possible for a man to rape another man. It is possible for a woman to rape another woman. So all of those are possible. They're not possible under the Model Penal Code, but they are possible under Pennsylvania's law. The rest of Pennsylvania's law is very similar to the Model Penal Code. Again, rape is not just lack of consent, but rape is sex brought about by forcible compulsion. So by forcing someone, throwing them down the ground, holding them down on the ground while the person is having sex with them, that would be forcible compulsion. Or threat of forcible compulsion that would prevent resistance by a person of reasonable resolution. So this isn't some threat that is really minor. oh, have sex with me or I'm going to tap you on the shoulder. Something stupid like that. That would not be the kind of forcible compulsion that's required under Pennsylvania rape laws, or the threat of forcible compulsion, I should say. You would have to threaten something more serious. I'm going to kill you, I'm going to harm you, I'm going to beat your child, whatever it might be, unless you have sex with me. And so, like in the Model Penal Code, force and threat of force are both part of the Pennsylvania rape statute and are ways that if a person gains sexual intercourse through these means, they're guilty of rape. Third one, again, is similar to the Model Penal Code. We're dealing with a complainant. Notice here the Pennsylvania uses the phrase complainant, the term complainant. They don't use victim. They don't use gender, woman or man. They don't say those things. They purposely use the word complainant because they want rape to be reported more. And they feel that this word empowers the victim more than calling the victim a victim. So Pennsylvania even made a choice about what we call the person who is a victim. We want to make them more empowered. Complainant sounds more like the person is in charge of this process. But going back to Part 3, the person is unconscious or the person doesn't know that sexual intercourse is occurring. Fourth, once again, almost identical to the Model Penal Code, it's rape in Pennsylvania if you have sex with a person who has been substantially impaired so that they don't know what's happening to them. So they've been drugged, they are so drunk that they don't know what's happening and you have sex with them. The fifth part is different than the Model Penal Code, but in Pennsylvania we especially lay out a provision that says if the person suffers from a mental disability, which renders them incapable of consent. So maybe they have some kind of mental disability, intellectual disability, and they can't legally give consent. So if you have sex with that person, then this would be rape. So again, this is one of the instances where lack of consent could be the basis for rape, but that's because the person that you're having sex with could not give consent because of their intellectual or mental disability. Now, you may say here, well, what about the statutory rape provision? Where's it? Why don't we have anything dealing with children? That's because if I gave you the full rape statute in Pennsylvania, we'd see that when it comes to grading the offense, whether it's a first-degree felony or what kind of punishment it's going to receive, that's where we talk about the age of the victim. That if they're under a certain age, then it's a more serious form of rape. But these are Pennsylvania's rape provisions.